Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being part of our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Luke Cunningham. He is here to celebrate Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire. Before we invite Luke in, we want to invite you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Be sure to sign up for our free newsletter. Find out all about our great live, in-person, and virtual events. And also, if you're an author, you can find out how you can be a guest on the podcast. You can find it all at readingwithyourkids.com. Joining us right now from Los Angeles in California. Our guest today is the author of a really exciting middle grade novel called Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire. Please welcome to the show, Luke Cunningham. Luke, how are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here. I just want to jump right into it. Who is Leo, and what kind of adventures are we going to go on with him?
Well, thank you, Jed. Leo is a 13-year-old boy genius who is at this kind of mysterious school called the Academy of Florence. He's been there since he was a baby. He has no recollection of his parents. He's a lifer at the school. There's very few lifers. And it turns out he is heir to the world's coolest toy company, which is called Win Toys. And through a series of puzzles that have been specifically left for him, Leo is going to find out the truth behind what happened to his family and why he was left as a lifer at the Academy of Florence. The hook to the story is that it is all based on the life of Leonardo da Vinci, who really was abandoned until he was 13 years old, and, you know, the world's most famous polymath and extraordinary genius.
Yeah. Yeah, talk about an incredible person in history to model your character after. Where did you get that inspiration?
So I've always loved history. I have a history degree, and honestly, there's a book called History of Knowledge, and it's by a guy named Charles Van Doren, and he was kind of disgraced in the quiz show scandal in the 50s. Mm-hmm. Robert Redford made a great movie about it called Quiz Show. But his book, to make amends for that, he wrote this book called History of Knowledge. And it's just a compendium of like everything humans have known and how that evolved. And it starts with when we discovered zero and how we could use zero. But on the cover of that book is a painting by Raphael called School of Athens, which is essentially just the Avengers of human thought. It is just everyone who has ever made a monumental contribution to human thought is all hanging out at this school in Athens. The center of it is Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo is in a corner, Aristotle, Averroes, the Muslim scholar known as the commentator, he's in there. And so it kind of started from there, and just trying to understand how these genius people pushed thought forward, and when you have these kind of inflection points. And for me, the Renaissance and humanism, when we started to rely on a rigorous pursuit of truth through science, I've always found that fascinating, and particularly how it seems like a lot of it started with Da Vinci. And Da Vinci, more than the others, was kind of like a common guy. Like, Da Vinci didn't speak Latin, and that's in my book, is my Leo hates Latin. Mm-hmm. Like, some of the puzzles are in Latin because the person who wrote the puzzles for him assumed he was going to know Latin. He doesn't. Da Vinci, who had this genius brain that was competent at all kinds of things, his notebooks are filled with him cursing Latin. So it's it kind of started there with this painting, Raphael's School of Athens, that was on a cover of a book that I loved. And then I just kept going down into a deeper dive with the research. Like Da Vinci 500 years ago, hold on, back up one second. My character, Leo, he has made his own pets. And one of them is a 500-pound robot lion named Gemini. And if you want to see Gemini, you can. There's an Instagram at leo.inventor.extraordinaire where you can see some of the drawings and how it evolved. But Da Vinci really did make a working robot lion 500 years ago out of wood that would take 3 steps forward and roar. So for me, the first time I read that, it just blew my mind that this guy was doing this 500 years ago. Was making robots, complex robots out of wood. And so I just, I don't know, I imagine him move that forward, and a 13-year-old Leo today making his own robot lion out of scrap metal and aluminum and soda bottles that he can find.
Wow. That really is kind of mind-blowing that Da Vinci created a working robot 500 years ago. I'm just trying to picture it, and I'm trying to figure out how it could work. Well, I mean, even if I saw it, I wouldn't be able to figure out how.
So it almost, you know, those toys that you like put on the ground and you rev them back, and then they go forward. It's got like there's like a series of plastic cranks and maybe a little bit of aluminum. That he just made those out of wood, but like I mean, the idea to look at it and be like, how can I encase all of this in something that looks like a lion? And then he made that.
Yeah.
And that to me was kind of the jumping off point with really going into my own character in the book of Leo.
Yeah. I'm sitting thinking that this would have been a perfect book for me to co-read with my son when he was in middle school.
Yes.
He had that imagination in mind, and I also love, I heard somebody compare Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire to Dan Brown novels, and I was very much into Dan Brown when my son was in middle school, so I'm imagining that would be, we'd have so much fun talking about Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire.
I mean, this book definitely does owe a lot to Dan Brown novels, and especially how Dan kind of immerses you in the history and then the art of wherever he's taking you via the Robert Langdon character. I mean, I'm certainly trying to do something similar of like, hey, here's this cool piece of art. Here is this kind of contemporary take on it, and here's how it fits in the context of the story. Like the cover of the book, hold on one second, I'll write it down. Like that's the cover of it is Leo, my character, in a mech suit that he's going to build over the course of the novel, but that picture is clearly based on the Vitruvian Man, the famous Da Vinci sketch of the square inside the circle. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, that's it's definitely contoured to be read, with parents and their kids. I mean, the best case scenario is a kid is reading this book and is like talking to their parents about, something that's in a museum and asking questions about it and kind of going into a little bit of the humanism and the art history.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is one of the reasons I love the Dan Brown novels so much, is because it caused me to ask questions.
Yes.
And it caused me to ask questions about my faith, about history. And I think that's awesome. I think the more that we can encourage our kids to ask questions, especially about those institutions and those things that so many of us think that you shouldn't be, like faith. Yeah. You shouldn't be asking questions about faith. Just shut up and kneel down and say the prayers you're supposed to say. I think those questions and getting those answers and the search for the answers are really where that knowledge comes from, and what can make our knowledge and our faith stronger.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think the like the coolest thing that all those Renaissance painters and artists were doing is they were interpreting biblical stories in new and exciting ways. Like these were that was the standard of storytelling for 1,500 years, was the interpretation of the Bible. And, from like Michelangelo's famous sculpture of David, like that was a new and vibrant interpretation of a biblical story. And like the underlying psychology of it remains the same. And I think, sometimes there's a little bit of friction between the artists and then the institution, but like the institution is better for the artist's interpretation of it. Like when I think of the greatest underdog story in history, it's David versus Goliath. And I'm immediately going to associate it with Michelangelo's sculpture of David. And it's not coincidentally in the book, towards the end, there is an illustration where Leo is in his mech suit and he is 100% specifically posed in the same stance as the David statue. But it's funny that you love those Dan Brown books. I mean, I love those Dan Brown books so much, specifically because of the way that they introduce you to the art and the way that they make it approachable. And I am, again, endeavoring to do the exact same thing in this book, where I grew up a very working class, middle class kid, and we would get to go to we would go to the art museum on field trips, and you're just kind of like wandering around looking at things and trying to read the description underneath. And if you can find a way to make that more approachable, but also something that, like, if a kid is walking around, it's like, oh, I get that statue and I understand like why that is so cool in context, or the huge leap that painting style made happened because of this revolutionary approach to geometry, which is, what like Verrocchio and Da Vinci were doing at the time. Like, there's a scene in the book that talks about hands and the way that you like the cliff notes for understanding, like, if a painter is really good is to look at the hands, like look at how they paint hands, because it's so hard to capture hands because there's all the different joints and the changing geometry and the shading. So like, if you want to know somebody's really good at painting, just look at the hands. And if you walk around a museum, anybody whose subject has their hands jammed in their pocket, they kind of took the easy way out.
Well, you're right. I think it could have been. I remember going into museums and here in Boston was this amazing Museum of Fine Arts, and my family were members for a long time, and but so much of the time I would just be going in and looking at the paintings and and going ooh and ah because I thought I was supposed to. And there were certain paintings that were certainly kind of cool. But it wasn't until, I was reading more about this history and reading it in a way that it was alive.
Yes.
When you're getting facts and figures spat at you and you're supposed to memorize the dates and be able to spit it back, that's just like putting things in the supermarket cart. But when you can turn those facts into stories that you can relate to, that changes the game completely.
I completely agree. So my first couple of years after college, I was a history teacher, and that was my favorite thing to do, was like to find something that, find some time period that kids found boring and then bring it alive for them. And to me, my favorite time period has always been kind of the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, and how things changed so dramatically for everything in the West. Like, it just became a situation where they recognized the way forward was to kind of listen to these weirdos who were finding ways to test truth and to test, like the empirical formula and the scientific method, and finding ways to make things demonstrably better for as many people as they could. And you mentioned Boston and the Fine Arts Museum. One of the buildings in the book is clearly based on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which is itself modeled after a 15th century Venetian palace. So,
and the location of the most infamous
art
heist in history that they still haven't solved.
I love that they came dressed as Boston cops. Like, they just came and were like, you gotta shut this down right now. Yeah. And then they just walked all the guards out.
Hey, you mentioned that you were a history teacher. And so a lot of people listening could say, yeah, I get that Luke was a history teacher, and then he was inspired to write a middle grade novel that's all about history. But you took a kind of swerve between history teacher to novelist. You had a stint as a writer for The Tonight Show.
Yes. So I did. Well, you've been performing magic for how many years?
33.
Yes. Yeah. So I performed stand-up for about, I think it was 7 years before I got hired on The Tonight Show. And it was great. You learn how hard it is to keep a crowd's attention, and how you kind of like methodically build your act. And eventually I was lucky enough, I'll never forget, I was going into what was going to be a terrible open mic in Hermosa Beach, California, when I got a call that I got hired, or I was coming in to be interviewed on The Tonight Show. And I just immediately bolted from that open mic. Like, I don't have to hang out here. And then when I got hired, I was working on a packet for another show, and it was terrible. I was in the Starbucks in Marina Del Rey. And when I got hired, I mean, I'm not ruining it. I honestly started crying, and I just put $20 in the tip jar and was just like, thank you so much for letting me write here for 4 hours a day on these joke packets, and, like buy 2 coffees maybe. But I worked on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, then it transitioned into The Tonight Show. I was just writing a ton of jokes.
Wow. That's... you mentioned I've been performing for 33 years, and there's definitely jokes in my show. And thankfully, my show evolves, but I don't have to write a new show every night. That just seems kind of mind-boggling to me.
It is, you train your brain in like kind of an exciting new way, where every day I had to have 40 jokes due by 11 a.m. And of those 40 jokes, and they send you the premises, and it was always like, I mean, it was 2013, 2014. So it was always like, Chris Christie shut down a bridge, and you got to like write a joke off of that premise. And so you were just building these little machines, because every joke is a little machine of like, here's a setup, and then here is hopefully a surprise that causes an uncontrollable reaction where you laugh. You didn't expect that, and you would just build so many of those so intensely in such a short period of time that like your brain gets trained to do that. Mm-hmm. Like, it was 10 hours a day with a group of, I think there were 5 other monologue writers and 7 sketch writers. And so every day of those 40 jokes, if I got 2 on, I would be over the moon joyful as I would be walking home from 30 Rock to the East Village. Would just be so psyched that I got 2 jokes on the show that day. And I'm enormously tall. I'm 6.5 feet tall. And at my annual review, I said that to Jimmy, where I was like, I mean, Jimmy, if I get 2 jokes on the show, I walk home, I feel like I'm 10 feet tall. And he was like, well, Luke, that's because you're 10 feet tall. But it's incredibly intense, and you're on a series of 3-month contracts. Like every 3 months, you kind of have to. You're writing for your job. You got to get jokes on the show, and you find new ways to like come up with tricks for your brain, where like the audience is excited and didn't see it. And it's a whole like of the jokes that you submit, Jimmy picks them. Mm-hmm. Like he's in there with you. He's intense. He's picking the jokes that he is going to say at monologue rehearsal. And monologue rehearsal was always people who had like not gotten into Meredith Vieira's show. So they were coming to watch our monologue rehearsal. And then they would test the jokes. And if they did well, they would get teed for the show. And man, there was nothing more exciting than when, you would get like a really good joke would crush at the show and then would like end up quoted in the New York Times or something like that. Like I have a few jokes. I would go get them, but my 19-month-old son will lose his mind if I leave this room right now. But I have the cue cards framed from like my particularly favorite jokes. I had one when Osama bin Laden, when I'm sorry, this is going to be a downer on Reading with Kids podcast. Where they got Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, that compound was going to be converted into an amusement park and a zoo. And my joke was what was it? The zoo is cool, but you'll never see the seals until it's too late. And that was in the New York Times. And my family was thrilled that it was like a seal joke, a zoo joke ended up, in the New York Times.
It's great. You know, one of the things that we talk about here on the podcast so many times is parents understanding that they need to allow their kids to fail.
Yeah.
And you're telling us every night I had to come up with 40 different jokes, and if 2 of them got on, that was a great night. But that meant that you took a swing and you whiffed 38 times.
94% failure rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and I'm thinking this might be a stretch, but I'm thinking guys like Da Vinci, like Elon Musk, those are guys who not every idea that they have is a hit. The difference is that they don't care if an idea flops. They expect it.
I think that's a really important thing for life. It's especially important for if you're writing. Like I have she was a brilliant editor, Jackie Alberta, who I would submit my draft, and she was like, "This is great. Here's what doesn't work. I need to fix this." And if you're somebody who is extraordinarily precious about your work, you're fighting back on that. Mm-hmm. And instead, what they're telling you is some of these ideas are great. These ideas don't particularly work, but we're trying to make your general idea better. Mm-hmm. And Da Vinci, there are, he has so many examples in his notebooks where he was not particularly precious about his work. There's like, he has so many attempts at making a perpetual motion machine, and eventually he just abandons it and is like, this isn't going to work. Because of X or Y or Z. And the tough part was he never published his memoirs because he essentially discovered one of the things that Newton figured out, centuries later, which was, what is it? I think it's Newton's second law of, anyway. So yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying like, you can't be precious about your ideas. And if someone is telling you like, we like some of your idea. Mm-hmm. Here are the other things. Like, I cannot recommend more highly accepting that feedback.
Yeah. I wish I had understood that. Not that I wish I had a career in music, but I was, like a lot of kids in high school and college, I was in a band. Uh-huh. And a friend of mine came up to me afterwards. She turned out to be one of the world's best beach volleyball players, professional beach. So she knew what she was talking about. She was just an amazing performer, and she came up to me after a show and she said, "You have a really great voice. You should take singing lessons." And that crushed me. I'm like, "What do you mean? I take singing lessons? That's for people who don't know how to sing." But now it's like, oh, you saw that I had something, and I could go to somebody who could help me make more of it.
Did you play an instrument?
I did. I played drums. Yeah.
Were you like, who was your drummer that you looked up to?
Oh, I loved Zeppelin, John Bonham.
Of course.
I'm almost 100 years old, so I think Ringo was the first drummer that I was aware of, but I know that he wasn't a great one. But Billy Cobham was amazing.
Oh, Bonham, did you say?
No, Bonham, but Billy Cobham.
Oh, Billy, okay.
Yeah.
One of the first puzzles in the book is based on a Beatles song, is based on Here Comes the Sun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm not ruining anything. You can, again, if you, the Instagram feed of Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire, he sees these musical notes, but he can't recognize them because they're written backwards, and they're above this old instrument that is left in his bedroom with him. And the instrument that is in his bedroom is based on the Viola Organista. Da Vinci really invented this musical instrument, again, 500 years ago, that it was like a combination of a barrel drum, an organ, and a viola. It looks like the most complex piano you can imagine. And it took him hundreds of years to build it. There was like one section missing. And then this Polish concert pianist figured it out and built it in 2013 and gave a recital on this instrument that they finally built out. You can view YouTube video, Viola Organista Da Vinci. You can see the guy playing it. But in the book, it all kind of hinges on that Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun.
Wow.
I love that song.
Wow. Boy, I tell you, I think you and I could chat for a couple of hours, but you have a 19-month-old that you have to attend to. And I have to ask you where people can go to find out more about you and find out more about Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire.
The first place I would recommend is the Instagram at leo.inventor.extraordinaire. There is a hyperlink on there if you're interested in buying the book, but there is, all of the art and illustrations, and then it'll explain kind of how the illustration fits in the book. And then if you scroll over, there will be the kind of Renaissance inspiration and an explanation of how that piece of art from the Renaissance inspired the current illustration. And the tough part has been having to do that without ruining any of the plot points of the book. Because again, I mean, I love those Dan Brown books. It is definitely written to be as approachable as possible. I borrowed from that kind of our dad reading books on the beach, like Michael Connelly paperbacks and stuff like that, where it's short chapters. Everything ends on that like cliffhanger. So yeah, it's meant to be like that and very consumable.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking here that Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire, if families come together, co-read this book together, read aloud together, listen to the audio version together. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really think this could launch years and years of listening. Now, I can see a family spending weeks just on Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire, going down all sorts of different rabbit holes, researching and whatnot. But I think it could really launch a family into just reading some mysteries together and making that a family, just a weekly family event. So very cool.
I mean, my best case scenario for this book is years from now, some parent comes up to me and is like, hey, we read your book together, and my kid started pointing out weird things in museums that I never would have noticed. And now they're an engineer somewhere working on something. And I'd be so thrilled to have any of that. That, and if anyone was cosplaying in the mech suit like they have on the cover, like if it ever turns into a situation where people are making their own mech suits, I'm going to lose my mind.
Well, we can't wait for that to happen. In the meantime, we want to say thank you.
Thank you so much.
To the writer of Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire, Luke Cunningham. Luke, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I would say go Patriots, but I'm an Eagles fan. So, thanks very much.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guests will be Elisa Nicole Trust and Charisse Rasco. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, Luke Cunningham. Be sure to check out Leo, Inventor Extraordinaire. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Alexia Brown, Hannah Pat Opoyski. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.